Talks at the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan are on the verge of collapse after poor countries walked out of the meeting saying their financial needs are being ignored. Negotiations were deadlocked over how much money richer nations should provide to poorer ones. In a moment, we'll hear from our climate reporter live in Baku. But first, our climate editor, Justin Rowlett, reports on the tensions that put the talks on a knife edge.
Delegates from developed countries head into a key meeting. How are the negotiations going?
We're not going to comment now.
That was the EU's climate minister. Here's UK Energy Secretary Ed Miliband. Ed.
How are things going?
Ed, how are things going?
Well, we're working for the best deal we can.
Is there any progress at all? Here's the problem. One clause in the current draft agreement estimates developing countries need $1.3 trillion of climate finance. The very next clause decides that countries led by richer nations will provide $250 billion a year of that. Now, we understand the offer has been raised to $300 billion a year, but developing countries say that is still not enough.
This is what they always do. They break us at the last minute, They push it and push it and push it until our negotiators leave, until we're tired, until we're delusional from not eating, from not sleeping.
To make things even more complicated, a group of fossil fuel-rich countries led by Saudi Arabia is trying to roll back on the promise the world made last year in Dubai to transition away from fossil fuels. That is the knot they're trying to untangle in this room, and all the while, the clock is ticking. Justin Rowlett, BBC News, Baku.
With us is Nick Bridge, who was the UK Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change from 2017 until 2023. Nick, thank you very much for being with us here on BBC News. We're hearing that things are teetering. As far as you're aware, it's because of small nations being unhappy with the money that's being offered?
Yeah, the main issue is this big financial package that the gathering has to agree, and the amounts put forward at the moment in draft have not been deemed acceptable by the smaller nations, the vulnerable nations. So I think that they have, I understand from the latest news, walked out of the current discussion. It goes on. I think they've been up all of last night. I'm sure they'll be up for a few more hours to make sure they get this crucial deal done. Yes,
it's already overrunning, but there was a huge gulf forming between the richer nations and the poorer ones, even though wealthier nations had doubled their offer yesterday to $25 billion a year. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's got to do a lot of work.
Yeah, $250 billion over the period. Yeah, and the hope is also that the public money that's been put forward by the industrial nations is then massively leveraged by other forms of innovative finance. You can look at other sources of tax revenue, other sources from the international financial system, development banks, and the private sector. So there's a lot in balance. What happens here is that different groupings are after different things, and the essential need is for them to come together. But certainly, this has got some way to go. I think that also there'll be a call from all nations that there's a widening of the donor base. There are other countries coming in who haven't previously committed funding. That'll be one conversation going on. How can the petrostates, how can China come in on this? But the poor and vulnerable countries are suffering these incredible impacts right here and now. It's getting exponentially worse each year. They desperately need support. This isn't a charitable act, it's a responsibility. And so, yeah, the heat of the negotiation is right ongoing.
But they've got to stick with it. They can't walk away with no agreement, can they?
Well, they'll be pushing as hard as they can and putting their maximum pressure on all the other parties to get this done.
OK. Nick Bridge, former UK Foreign Secretary, Special Representative for Climate Change. Thank you for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's speak to our climate reporter, Esme Stallard, who is in Baku. What's the latest you're hearing, Esme? What's been happening?
Well, it is quite manic here. You'll probably see behind me there's a lot of the world's press, but also negotiators from countries all around the world. They've been in meeting room 11 talking to the president about the latest cash offer on the table for poorer countries to help them fight climate change. We understand that $300 billion was put forward by richer countries, including the EU, the UK and the US, but developing countries here are not happy. We've just found out that AOSIS, which basically represents all the small island states, they all negotiate together as a bloc. bloc. They've walked out. They said they are not being heard. We've also just heard in the last few minutes that the least developed countries, so that's a massive group of countries amongst the poorest countries in the world, has said they are temporarily pulling out. So we don't know quite what that means, what will actually bring them back to the table, but likely they're looking for a higher cash offer. John Podesta, the US climate envoy, is a little bit more positive. He said he hopes this is the storm before the calm. So as you can see, there is a lot going on here, and we're just trying to keep up with things as they move very quickly.
Finance deal proposed that wealthier countries would give $250 billion a year by 2035. So how much is the figure that developing nations would be happy with if they said?
So we've heard from the Africa group of countries. They said they're looking for a figure closer to 500 billion. It's not just the total amount of money they're looking for by 2035. They're also looking for that to come more in the form of grants. So typically a lot of the money these countries have been given historically to help tackle climate change and also prepare for it has been in the form of loans. And all this has done is increase their debt burden, they say. So they don't want any more money like that. So it's not just a straightforward discussion about numbers here. It's also about dates, who's giving them money and in what form.
Esme, for the moment, thank you very much. Esme Stallard, our climate reporter in Baku.